NSW. Forensic scientists of Reddit. What is the most WTF case that you ever had? I had a professor who was an expert in osteology and would train radiologists and doctors to recognize defensive fractures in arm bones. Defending yourself from an attack can leave a very distinctive spiral fracture on your forearms, and in his years of research, he'd never encountered that specific fracture pattern anywhere except in a defensive wound. Until he was attending a seminar at the University of Toronto in February, and when leaving the lecture, he was walking down an outdoor flight of stairs when someone called out to him to ask a question. He had his hands in his pockets because he wasn't wearing gloves, turned, slipped and fell while perpendicular to the steps. His forearm hit the step and resulted in the exact spiral fracture he'd never seen anywhere else. And best part is that the radiologist that examined him was someone he himself had trained to look for this sort of fracture as a warning sign for domestic violence. Digital forensics case. Executive was using way more data than anyone else on his record. The local IT guys took it to check it out for viruses and whatnot. Found lots of child pee. Guy got brought up on charges. Lost his job. Family torn apart. The whole spiel. We do our analysis. Find out there was a virus they were serving said pictures for a dark website. Only thing that got him off was the rate at which the data was accessed. He got fat restitution, but that won't put his life back together. Made me get out of the business because I know this guy was guilty for sure, but we kept finding little hints that suggested it was something other than what we thought. Had we missed something, he would be in jail as we speak. Couldn't sleep with that kind of burden. After things like this, I think it should be required that the whole public be notified that the person is innocent. Like, if they were to do a bit on the news, to legally notify the business of their innocence. I'm a specialty forensics investigator that focuses on fire and explosions. Somehow, a lady with a coffee can of gas, her husband's asphalt covered work clothes, and a front load dryer managed to turn the dryer into a rocket ship that launched through a plate glass window and 10 featuring into the road. We have no known models that can demonstrate how the available materials were able to launch the dryer. Attended a lecture by a pathologist once who asked us what household item someone had managed to kill themselves with. A toothbrush, a rubber band or a matchstick? He went on to tell us that a man had killed himself accidentally while trying to clean his ear out with a matchstick. Punctured a blood vessel, painted a wall with his own blood, passed out and bled out on the sofa. A friend's wife does forensics field work for a sparsely populated area and had said that only one case has been noteworthy. She was asked to analyze a crime scene in a house used to manufacture M. She surveyed the outside and then proceeded with an officer to the kitchen where the basement door was located. In the basement they found a metal door bolted shut and they decided to call for bolt cutters to enter. They didn't have them at the time, so she kept examining the area and found a side door to THR room behind a furnace. The lock was jimmied open and they found a sawn-off 12-gauge shotgun had been pointed at the bolted door. The gun was loaded and the tripwire still attached to the shotgun. She described it as the most chilling experience of her career. I worked in a morgue for a while. Lots of weird things. One case in particular stands out. A man was found dead in a food truck. He looked pretty normal from the outside. After we took off his clothes, things started looking a bit odd. He was wearing women's underwear that had holes cut in them for his dong. He probably had on around 20 pairs of the underwear. He also had a penis pump on his penis with a few condoms on. I don't remember what the cause of death was. Wonder what his family thought about it. Maybe not the most gruesome, but definitely one of the weirder things I saw. The saddest case was two brothers out hunting. The older one, 14, shot the younger one, 12, accidentally when he saw deer. He hit his brother square in the back of the head, which leaves quite the exit wound on the other side. Yes, he did flip him over and see what he did. Feel bad for the kid. Most WTF. See kid on her period with a week-old pad. Yes, she used the same one for a week. Threw it at a cell good. I got to take pictures of the pad. Was pretty gross, but at least I didn't get hit by the pad. The coolest forensic story I heard was in a forensic math seminar a few years back. This case was, I think, used as inspiration for an episode of Bones. A guy killed his daughter but didn't report her missing until 8 or 9 months later. When they did find her remains, They were able to prove that she had died months before the father claimed that he last saw her because there was a wasp nest in her skull. That particular breed of wasp only builds nests in dry places, so she had to have already been decomposed prior to their nest building season. Woman told me she would mail us a discreet sample for her paternity test. FedExes us a huge couch cushion with the tiniest CM stain on it ever. I work in digital forensics. All the most WTF stuff has been diddler related, not in how horrible they are, but in how illogical the suspect's carnal tastes were. This is a story from my fake uncle, a forensic officer who has leading a team of juniors in a suicide case. The victim of the suicide had filled a water pressure based fire extinguisher with explosive material. He didn't go into detail, and hugged it like a teddy bear. Naturally, when he went off and out with a bang, he went all over the roof, walls and floor. My uncle proceeded to find a foot with all the tendons hanging out and paraded it in front of the juniors and pulled all the tendons, making the toes wiggle. His only regret was not finding a hand. Always fun around the most macabre of my father's friends. This little piggy went to the market. Nothing too weird yet, but lem tell you, every crime scene I've been to fricking splodge everywhere. Semen in the carpet, semen in the corpse, semen in the curtains, semen in the beard. I don't think you should be jerking off at a crime scene. I once asked a paramedic his absolute worst job story. There was a vehicular accident he attended. An absolutely immense woman driving a Ford Pinto slammed into a cattle truck carrying calves. Before he got on scene, some person, who had arrived before, realizing this was primo veal, went nuts picking it up for their use. The huge woman had literally, not figuratively, exploded at impact. After they had spent a rather lengthy time gathering this lady up in pieces, there was one rib section they never found. After completing my medical graduation, I was posted as a junior resident in the Department of Forensic Medicine. 40+ female who had suffered burn injury died due to overhydration with IV fluid. When her chest was opened, believe me, the smell hits your frontal cortex like no other smell. It was messy. Very, very messy. I was called to perform an X-ray examination on a burn victim. The victim was significantly charred. Much of the body mass had been burned away, but large portions of the quadriceps and gluteals remained intact and exposed. When I walked into the morgue through an airlock, the smell was sweet and pleasing. It smelled distinctively like barbecued chicken, and for a brief moment, made me hungry. That single case bothered me more than having carrion beetles crawl off of a body and onto my face. Not me, but someone I worked with at a pharmaceutical laboratory left to become a forensic scientist. One of the first cases was a man who repeatedly broke into a farm and had physical relations with the livestock. When he was caught and went to trial, he would only admit to having relations with the female animals, even though there was evidence for interfering with both genders. Apparently he was quite aggressive about denying the male victims. Always amused that he presumably didn't want his reputation amongst other animal diddlers being ruined. Not me, and not a forensic scientist, but my dad is a EMT. He went on a run about noses in an abandoned house that sounded like a person. It was just a cat going nuts. He said the house looked like it was from the Addams Family. When he went in, he checked the house and found a mummy hung in the closet by a belt. He says there was a lot of gay mags laying around too, so it looked like autoerotic asphyxiation. He said there was no smell either, so the guy had been dead for a while. It turns out he died 3 years ago and his neighbors just thought he moved or was foreclosed on. TLDR. My dad once found a gay mummy in the closet at the Addams Family house. Best TLDR description ever. Guess that guy never made it out of the closest. I'm not a forensic scientist, but did forensic anthropology as part of my degree. When handling a ribcage, a ton of flakes came off and ended up being lodged in my mouth, nose and eyes thanks to a friend. The flakes landed on the table and my friend jokingly blew them into my face, and that's how they ended up lodged. Not I was handling it and a load of them fell into my face. 4/10 probably wouldn't recommend it. Ribcage flakes. Theory gross. Forensic genetic in Mexico. I've seen some serious crap. I was assigned to the identification of mass graves. Over 300 bodies, dismembered, scattered and burned. It was just one site. We had men at Stepfather used to be a police officer and loves telling stories about crime scenes. He went on to tell us about how after a motorcycle rider was struck by a train, he went under the wheels. His torso was found about 30 feet from his legs. They were connected by an intestine. So he picked up one end of the intestine and started to wrap it up like a rope. My cousin and a coroner, and the worst was he came to get a body in a trailer. During the summer, the man had been dead at least a week and had burst. He said the smell was the worst of his life. He and the other guy were up to their ankles in fluids and had to throw out his clothes and shoes. His boss felt so bad that he bought them each a new pair of like $300 shoes. Not me, but there was a great case that I can't currently find on Google. I hope it was true. A woman was found dead in her bed with blood everywhere. And I mean everywhere. There were wine glasses, or drinking glasses, throughout the house with blood in them. I think blood may have been smeared about as well. So the investigators assume some bizarre ritual, a gang of people, the whole 9 yards. Long story short, she had some strange clotting problem and was bleeding out of her mouth for an extended period of time. She probably got hazy from the loss of blood and was just trying to not make a mess in her house, so she kept spitting the blood in glasses. Eventually she was overcome and died in her bed. I only hope it was true, BC. I don't want to propagate lies. There's a crime scene photo somewhere of a man who committed suicide by putting himself through a bandsaw. He rigged it up specifically for the purpose. It was on the old Ogrish site, before it became Liverlake. I'm still active on Ogrish forums, so I may be able to dig it up. I'm good. Thanks for the offer. I did an internship at a PD 1 year. I got to be with the forensic team for a week. I got to see the aftermath of what a stabbing looks like. A 113 stab wound aftermath. Yes, 113 is correct. Unreal amounts of blood. Used a kitchen knife. Upon first inspection it appeared like a dozen because there was so much blood on the body they couldn't tell how many there actually was. Gruesome. I was a forensic scientist for over 30 years. During that time I have worked on just about every kind of bizarre atrocity that you can imagine. Debauchery, murder, incest, torture, cannibalism. I'm sure the details would either gross you out or excite you, or both. The thing is that at the end of the day, when I look back on these thousands of cases, the only feeling I have is the sense of tragedy and loss. This is especially true of the victims and their families, but also, to some extent, the perpetrators and their families as well. The frustrating thing about forensic science is that you are always reacting to a crime that has been committed. You don't prevent anything and you don't save anybody. The most that you can say is that you help in bringing about closure for all concerned, or perhaps curtail the activity of a serial criminal. I have found that as the years have passed and I reflect on my career, the memories of the gory details fade and have been replaced with compassion, empathy and respect for those people whose lives were tragically altered. Before I got into digital forensics, I worked a case as a patrol deputy, where a guy committed suicide by tying a rope to a light pole and opening the tailgate of his Ford Explorer and running the rope into the truck and around his neck. He then accelerated through the parking lot until the rope ran all slack out and popped his head off. The truck crashed and we found his head in the backseat floorboards. First off, not me, of course, but a guy I talked to at a party that did real CSI. Here's the crime scene. House, front door, windows, no sign of forced entry, back door, sliding glass door broken into, glass on the inside of the house, glass tracked into house, footprints and blood drops led into house, body, older male, in kitchen, massive pool of blood, face blown off by shotgun, hands, arms have cuts on them, kitchen, shotgun laying on floor, not far from body, one empty shell on floor, table, chairs are messed up, there is blood splattered on the ceiling. In addition to the blood on the ceiling, the buckshot spray of pellets on the wall, more buckshot spread and no blood. The family was positive that the house had been broken into and the man was attacked and killed by his own shotgun in the struggle. After toxicology and forensics was done, this was determined. The man was depressed and drank a lot. On the night he died, he'd gotten very drunk at a bar, came home so drunk that he couldn't open his own front door, went around back and broke through the glass of the sliding door, He went to his bedroom, loaded his shotgun, went into the kitchen to kill himself. His first shot was standing, pointing the gun at his head. The shotgun kicked so hard and he wasn't holding it right, so it went off next to his head and shot the wall. He stumbles and falls as a result, messing up the kitchen. He gets back up to his nest, dongs the gun to load another shell, puts the butt of the gun on the floor and the barrel under his chin. As the gun fires, it kicks again, and instead of blowing his whole head up, the barrel moves forwards a bit and blows most of his face off, shoots the ceiling. He falls over and dies of blood loss. I am not a forensic scientist, but I did major in it while in school for a while before switching. We had this one professor who was older and he was good guy. He worked in the Detroit Police Department for years, different branches I guess you would call it. Homicide, hostage negotiation, stuff like that. We would go over old cases all the time in the class, and the one that stuck out to me was, he had a teenager who apparently hated his parents. The teenager decides he wants to kill himself while his parents are out of town. So he turns up his heat to an ungodly temperature and shoots himself in the head. He was there for 3 or 4 days if I recall correctly. The parents came home to described by my teacher the most freaking foul thing he's ever smelled and seen. The parents moved out of the house after not being able to get rid of the smell apparently. A mate works at the hospital and his friend used to be the coroner, and one day he's like, come down and check this out. The guy had a middle-aged Australian Aboriginal lady lying on the slab dead as dead can be, and the coroner explains death was the result of a shotgun blast. It wasn't SSH but instead bird shot from an estimated 50 feet away, and he say to my mate find the pellet holes, so he's looking and finds 3 of them. One was in the leg, another in the neck and another was in the abdomen. The last one in the abdomen was the pellet that killed her because it penetrated the liver anyway. The coroner said good on you, well done, but you missed one, there 4 pellet holes in this woman. So my mate's looking and eventually he gives up, so the coroner said look at the back of her hand. The last pellet hole was on the outside of her middle finger. She had been giving the finger to the person who shot her. The most Aussie killing in this thread. Back when I had an odor removal business, I got a request from an RV place to come deodorize an RV. One of the really nice 40-footers with slidiots. Upon asking, turns out that a 12-year-old girl had committed suicide by tying a line from the door handle to the trigger of a shotgun, then sat in front of it and waited. 'Twas mom who opened the door. I couldn't get the smell out. The fluids had soaked through the carpet, which they had replaced, and into the cheap particle board flooring RV builders use. Told them they'd have to rip out the floor and replace the wood to eliminate the smell. They were not happy to hear that. I can't imagine how horrible it must be knowing you killed your kid. There was a book I read called something like Medical Review of Death or something similar that covered various manner of death and how the body presented itself afterward. Some of the things I remember are drowning or water related death where the skin degloves from the muscle underneath, to a degree where much of it sloughs off once the body has been recovered. Other pictures showed suicide by hanging where either the full trauma decapitated the head, or eventually broke and separated the vertebrae and the muscle and skin of the neck stretched to a grotesque length. It also showed suicide by asphyxiation in prison where the prisoner simply tied his shirt between 2 points and leaned in, allowing his body weight to keep the pressure on once he passed out. The stretched neck pictures were especially disturbing because the body otherwise has no sign of trauma, yet the elongated neck is so out of place. Dated a girl for a while whose dad is a retired cop. They got a call for a welfare check. They got to the house of a big fat guy that was a hoarder. His family hadn't heard from him and the neighbors were reporting a smell. They entered the residence and struggled just to get to his room upstairs and find a bloated fat guy hanging from the back of the door. The coroner comes, pronounces him dead as if it wasn't obvious, and now they have to figure out how to get this mass of leaking body down the stairs. Officer Dad says, well, there's already a rope around his neck, and there's a balcony, and that's what they did apparently. He says he's never laughed harder at something so morbid. That dude kind of scared me a little. My grandfather is a retired sheriff from a small rural town in Georgia. I went up to visit him for the weekend one time last year and he asked me to help him clean out his house. To my surprise, he had a small arsenal worth of guns in storage and distributed throughout the house. I asked him why he had at least one loaded gun in basically each room of his house, and he said that it was because he'd put away a lot of people during his career as sheriff and he thought some of them might be stupid enough to try to kill him once they out of prison. The reason this is relevant to this post is one of the shotguns he kept under his bed. It was normal looking enough except that it had orange evidence tape around the barrel. When I asked him about it, he said that when he was sheriff, a local man had killed himself in front of his family with this gun. When the investigation was finished, the family naturally did not want the shotgun back, so they just gave it to my grandfather. So for the past 15 years my grandfather has gone to bed every night with a blood-spattered suicide shotgun under his bed. When I asked him how that didn't creep him out, he just laughed and muttered something about how kids today are pussies. Had another one come to mind. This was before I started working for a crime lab, but is still toxicology and is forensic in nature. Had a sample come in from a drug treatment program. Urine. I was doing one of the confirmation tests for THC, and I needed to order another test on the sample. Looked up the sample. Female. 19 years old. Screening tests were positive for opiates, benzodiazepines, THC, amphetamines, C, barbiturates, and pregnancy. Keep in mind this person was still alive. I'm not a forensic scientist, but I'm sure the one assigned to the case I saw would have said WTF. Long story short, a guy in a convertible Dodge Viper over-accelerated on a highway on-ramp, lost control, and when he collided with the steel cable barrier in the median, one of the steel cables slid up the hood, over the windshield, and decapitated the driver. I've been told this is more common than people would like to believe, though. Man attempts suicide by wrist cutting. Cuts the wrong way, not bleeding enough to kill himself, but severs the tendon so his hands are nearly useless. Takes a shotgun to shoot himself in the head, but the fricked up hands led him to blow the front of his face off. Nose, lips. Guy survives. Not me, but a close connection to my family growing up, and such a sad story that it became common knowledge in our small town. My mother's colleague at the college she taught at was married to a CSI. Early one morning he was called out to investigate an open and shut suicide case. The body of a young male had been found on the foreshore by a dog walker, with a bottle of whiskey and a ton of pills. The CSI arrived at the scene to find that the boy was his son. Not a scientist, but I was working with crime scene photos to create a training folder about the dynamics of murder-suicide. Grant projects are great. The retired cop who used his service weapon to off his family then himself will always stick with me. Count the shots from his 6-shot .38 revolver with me. Dog 2. Daughter 1. Wife 1. Self 3. The guy finished off everyone else, botched himself twice, reloaded, and finally finished the job. Never seen a gun fired after being covered in so much blood. I went to a lecture given by a forensic entomologist. His most interesting case involved the body of a murdered prostitute that had been discovered in the woods. He was called out to help determine the time of death. He collected maggots and larvae off of the body. However, in each nostril was a giant maggot approximately 3 to 4 inches in length and so fat that they completely filled her sinus cavity. This was a result of her snorting powder C shortly before her death, which resulted in the maggot's supergrowth. Obviously, those 2 maggots were much larger than any of the others. I wish that I could remember the doctor's name. Unfortunately, I cannot. The lecture was a long time ago, 1998, but I've never forgotten that case. The company I work for doesn't usually clean up crime scenes, but it's something my boss has been trying to get into for a while. We have gone and done a couple of bids. Usually when we show up the crime scene is over a week old, sometimes 2. This one in particular, a man murdered his girlfriend and confessed the next day, so it was about 3 or 4 days old. This man stabbed his girlfriend 56 times throughout the home while she was trying to get away. He then scalped her in the bathroom. There was blood and hair everywhere. That's not even the most fricked up part. After she was dead, apparently he cut off her boob and cooked it in a frying pan. Drugs were involved. This story made me grab both my boobs just to make sure they were okay. Shbooby is okay. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now. Bye.